let's jump to Karl Anthony Towns because similar, incredible individual performance, but very different tone. Very different tone following that game because he had 62 in a loss. He had 44 at half, and I started watching that game a little simultaneously with Grizzlies Raptors, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, like, what would be the most Karl Anthony Towns way for this to go? It might be that the Timberwolves find a way to lose to the Charlotte Hornets on a night that he goes off for whatever his final was going to be. It's 62. They do lose, and Chris Finch afterwards was not happy. Mike, did you listen to his comments?
I didn't. I didn't listen to his comments.
We have the video. So
right, cool.
Let's roll what Chris Finch had to say following the loss, but Cat's big game.
It was an absolute disgusting performance of defense and immature basketball all the way through the game. So it really didn't slip away. It had been there from the jump. So this is what happens when you have this type of approach.
This is what happens when you have that type of an approach. Immature basketball. Absolutely disgusting display of defense.
For context, Karl Anthony Towns, 44 in the first half, ended with 62, literally shot them out of an 18-point lead.
2 of 10 in the fourth quarter.
Literally did that. So
yeah,
that's frustrating.
And you know what? Kudos to Finch for being brave enough to stand up to the #1 pick in the draft. And he didn't go directly at Karl, but you could tell when he said from the start to the finish, there was only one guy who was doing his same thing from the start to the finish. And when that team plays away from Gobert and Anthony Edwards, these type of things happen. But Karl Anthony Towns, this is the one thing. They can only hurt themselves. If they play their best basketball, there are not too many teams in the NBA that's going to beat them, especially in a 7-game series with them having home court advantage. But they are their own worst enemy because we saw that same type of thing play out when they had the Grizzlies dead to right. And they just kept blowing them. Remember, 2 years ago, they kept blowing like 20-point leads against the Grizzlies because they were shooting their way out of games. So that is an immature approach. Karl Anthony Towns had a remarkable game, but when it comes to a loss and a loss at home and then a loss at home to the Charlotte Hornets, like that is embarrassing. And you got to regroup from that. And hopefully that team, for their sake, will be able to learn from it.
And Finch definitely was more like directly pointed to Karl Anthony Towns in his comments following that one. Like someone followed up, do you feel like you were trying to, feed the hot hand or whatever the context of it was? And he said, I mean, there's a lot of times when just because you've scored 2 or 3 or 4 points in a row or baskets in a row, obviously we're going to try to feed a hot hand, look for a hot hand. But at some point, we have to get back to making the right play. We have to get back to doing the right things at some point. Is this the kind of thing, I hear this, and obviously the Timberwolves are amongst the best in the NBA this season. And like you just said, like dissent like this or just friction like this can be something that keeps a team that is built to win a championship from winning a championship. Is there a world in the future where Karl Anthony Towns still gets traded from the Timberwolves? Like is something like this, that like impetus that makes it happen?
It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if that still is on the table in these next 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
Like really, I mean, if Minnesota can guarantee that they get back some level of front court depth and help, and maybe draft picks or some other assets, they have to be considering that from that standpoint. His name has been floated out there, a few times before, and I think that team and that market might be ready to move on from him if this is going to continue to be a cog in their wheel in terms of how they want to operate. I saw how they operate. The Grizzlies just played there. They started this trip, which seemed like it started months ago now. It seems like we've been on the road for a long time. But that trip started in Minnesota. Grizzlies beat them up for 3 quarters, and they looked like, wow, what is happening with this team? And when it shifted to Gobert doing his thing defensively and Anthony Edwards taking over in the second half, with Mike Conley sort of being the mitigator there, you saw them play at a different level, and they outscored the Grizzlies by 20 in the fourth quarter. And they never got back to that. They never hit that switch that said, okay, now let's do what we do. And Karl Anthony Towns didn't let him do that because he was pursuing a great game individually at the expense of the team's collective value in what they do well.
The Jessica Benson Show with CJ Hurt, live every weekday at 8 a.m.